Chapter 1.1.2 Objects in Kubernetes. This page describes how Kubernetes objects are portrayed in the Kubernetes API and how they can be articulated in YAML configuration files. Understanding Kubernetes objects. Kubernetes objects are crucial entities in the Kubernetes system that represent the state of a cluster. These objects can describe containerized applications running on nodes, available resources, and behavior policies. Once an object is created, the Kubernetes system will continuously ensure that the object exists based on the desired state of the cluster. To work with Kubernetes objects, the Kubernetes API is used either through the command line interface or client libraries. Most Kubernetes objects have a spec field, which specifies the desired state of the object, and a status field, which describes the current state of the object maintained by the system. The Kubernetes control plane actively manages the objects to match the desired state set by users. For example, a deployment object may have the spec set to deploy 3 application replicas, and the system will create and maintain these instances to match the desired state. When creating a Kubernetes object, the object spec must be provided, along with basic information such as a name. This information is typically provided in a YAML manifest file, which tools like kubectl can use to create the object. The manifest file needs to include fields like API version, kind, metadata, and spec to define the object. The format of the object spec varies for each Kubernetes object, so references like the Kubernetes API can help understand the necessary fields for each object type. For instance, the spec field for a pod object will detail the container image name, while the spec for a stateful set will describe the stateful set's desired state and the template for creating pod objects. Each object type might have different .status fields to highlight the status of the object. It is essential to follow configuration best practices and refer to the API reference pages when creating Kubernetes objects to ensure the desired state of the cluster is maintained accurately. Server-side field validation. Starting from Kubernetes v1.25, the API server now offers server-side field validation, detecting unrecognized or duplicate fields in an object. This feature provides the same functionality as the kubectl validate command, but on the server side. The kubectl tool uses the validate flag to set the level of field validation, with options including ignore, warn, and strict. By default, the validation setting for kubectl is -validate equals true. If the API server does not support field validation, kubectl will fall back to client-side validation. It is important to check the documentation for older Kubernetes clusters, pre-v1.27, as field validation may not be available.